Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Freeology Friday. I am Aaron Tomlinson, and he is.
I am Derrick Day. How you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing great, man. It's good to see you.
Good to
How
see
you
you
been?
too.
How you been?
I'm doing pretty good. I think that life is turning a corner.
That's that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited about that.
Glad to hear it. So, it's one of those synchronicities for tonight. We both are. Our headspace has been in the same place as
Yep.
far as the sacred feminine. So, but you chose the topic. I'm going to let you tee it up for us.
Okay. Well, give me just a second here because I lost my workspace here. Okay, there we go. So,
Right.
I was thinking about this, and you and I were. Um, you want to talk about the whole Gnostic thing right now, or you want to leave that to another time?
No, we can talk about it now. It's
Okay.
fine.
So we've been kind of we've been dabbling in the Gnostic arts,
Yeah.
and and, uh, and so there's so many things in Gnosticism that I think mainstream Christianity has either forgone or ignored, and I think perhaps the greatest one is the sacred feminine or the divine feminine.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny how Christianity, particularly over, like, say, the last, let's say, the last millennium, last 10 centuries,
Mm-hmm.
has largely ignored or marginalized women, even
Mm-hmm.
though if you go back and look in your Bible, I'm talking to you, Christian, your Bible is chock full of women either building churches, planting churches, or sustaining churches. And in some cases, preaching and teaching in churches. And yet, here we are in 2020 fucking 5.
Mm-hmm.
And there are still people out here that say women can't preach, or women shouldn't lead, or
Yeah.
women shouldn't be president of the United States. I'm looking at you, right wingers. Well, not just right wingers, because some of you left wingers missed the assignment. Just putting it out there. But anyway,
Mm.
so much of femininity has been just either left on the cutting room floor, ignored, or in some cases it's been hidden. And I was thinking about this, that do you know that in the process of the synods and the councils that either canonized scripture or dictated the nature of Jesus, the being of Jesus, that there were books, entire volumes, entire codices that were destroyed. I mean, this knowledge is a lot of this knowledge is just gone. They just burn it
Mm-hmm.
because they were fearful of what would happen if people got hold of this knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is my hypothesis, and I don't really have anything to base it on other than what we know to be included in the canon of scripture now and what we've seen in our Gnostic dabbling. Yeah. That there is a female component to what we know to be Christianity, or what we think to be Christianity, that has been ignored, marginalized, hidden, or destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And so today, and there's no way we're going to be able to do this in an exhaustive way. I mean, we have what we an hour, 2 hours max, when we're feeling really jiggy, but there's no way we could cover it all. But I think that there are some important things to cover, and boy, oh boy, I have a doozy for you. I shared it with you in the green room. I'm not going to share it right now because I'm not gonna open with the climax. I'm going to say the climax for the climax.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we'll all have a cigarette afterward. How about
that? Well, speaking of that, for me, and this may just be me, so I'm just speaking for myself, everybody out there. This is just Aaron. I don't think you can talk about so I did a live video that I called The Fall of the Divine Feminine recently.
Yep.
And I don't know how you do your stuff. I suspect you're like me. I do mine really spontaneously. Like I very seldom have notes or anything. I just kind of go off the cuff and let it go where it's going to go. Right. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes it goes a surprising direction. In other words, I'm saying stuff. Sometimes I'm like, and this used to happen to me when I was preaching too, I've never even thought of this before. What am I doing? Like that's the dialogue in the back of my head while my mouth is moving, right?
Yeah. You have an Admiral Stockdale moment, who am I? What am I doing here?
Oh man, I'm telling you, like most people don't know this about me, but I am most people misunderstand what it is to be an introvert or an extrovert. I am a true introvert. So true introvert is not somebody that's shy or doesn't like to be around people, but you get drained if you don't have time to yourself to regenerate. And for a long time, I was shy in addition to that. So preaching for me, like the idea that I'm going to stand up there for 30 minutes. I mean, it's hard to imagine this now, I'm sure, but how am I going to keep talking for that long? Right. So there were times where it's just like my mouth was just on autopilot trying to take up the clock. Right.
Yeah.
So I'd have this whole other dialogue going on and not even really know what was coming out of my mouth. Sometimes I'd even have to go listen to the message to find out what some of what I said. So this was one of those times when I was doing the fall of the divine feminine, and I veered off into sexuality and the link between these two things, that really you can't talk about, at least for me, like I said, this is just me. You can't talk about the sacred feminine or the loss, specifically the loss of the sacred feminine. Let me put it that way. You can't talk about the history of the loss of the sacred feminine without talking about sexuality and sexual repression, really for both men and women. Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm bringing this up, I take a little, maybe I might take a little different track than you on this. I think the people who are in Christianity and are saying that women can't be pastors and women can't be leaders and women can't be teachers, women certainly can't be president, are actually truest to the biblical model and the biblical text because of the oppression of women that existed throughout the agricultural age, not just in the Greco-Roman or first century world, right?
Yep.
And so I did this in my video. I looked at some of the scriptures where Paul says, simply says, I do not allow a woman to teach or have authority over a man in Timothy. Yep. In 1 Corinthians, I do not allow a woman to speak in the church. It's shameful for a woman to speak. And yeah, he probably meant what he said. I mean, today as preachers, we try to come around and soften that or reinterpret it or rephrase it. And there's a lot of what I would call urban legend, because I did a deep dive into this shortly before I deconstructed, where I was doing a series, not just in my church, but other churches as well, called Why Not Women? And so I got very good at apologizing for Paul's texts and saying, oh, Paul didn't really mean, in the church in Corinth, you had the women on one side, the men on the other side. Did you know that's total bullshit? Nobody knows how they conducted their church services, much less the decorums that they used. It's not recorded anywhere. That's just something somebody made up. So misogyny is part of the estate that has been left to us from Christianity and from the church. And the reason I'm bringing this up is while you were talking, I was looking this up. Sir Tertullian is one of the earliest of the church fathers, right? One of the first writings of really Christians that we have. Like, again, a lot of people don't realize, like, we didn't have, like, they later found full copies of the Gospels and various different things. Much later, they found the Gnostic texts, but for a long time, the way they reconstructed some of the books of the Bible was from the writings of these church fathers.
Yep.
And they totally reconstructed Gnosticism from the writings of the Orthodox church fathers until they discovered much later manuscripts that have been hidden, right?
Yep.
So Tertullian says this, and he says this because Eve is to blame for the first sin, and it extended to all women. And he says, here's a quote. He says to the women, "You are the devil's gateway." Now, this is the title of his sermon or whatever they have, right? His letter, whatever it is. On the dress of women. Tertullian says, "You are the devil's gateway. You are the unsealer of that tree. You are the first forsaker of the divine law. You are the one who persuaded him whom the devil was not brave enough to approach. You so lightly crushed the image of God, the man, Adam." And so he says, you are the devil's gateway to women, but the devil's gateway specifically in regards to how they would dress. So this is something else I addressed in my video. And this is one of that spontaneous things where I'm like, holy shit, I had to go back and kind of fact check myself, Yeah. But when Peter writes or Paul writes, because Peter does this in one of his epistles, don't let your adorning be with braided hair and jewelry and makeup, but let it be your chastity, let it be your propriety, all that kind of. It was all about the sexual stuff. And then we come along in the 21st century and we say, well, he was just saying that because that's how the prostitutes dressed, and he was trying to get the women to distinguish themselves from the prostitutes, and so therefore the application of that scripture today is woman, don't be a prostitute. when the whole thing, and that there were men that were eunuchs. That was a big thing. If a lot of the first Christian men that converted, because Jesus said, if your right eye offends you, pluck it out. If your hand offends you, cut it off. So a lot of the guys castrated themselves. Yeah. And so chastity was a very important thing in the early church, in the writings of the early church fathers, and in the Bible. And so there's this sort of oppression of sexuality in general, but especially this oppression of women's sexuality. God forbid a woman have a high libido or something. But then in addition to that, you're tempting the men. Like, it's okay for the men to have high libido. That's what we do. We're men, right? But if you dress a certain way so you're attractive, now you're inflaming this lust inside of me. And we have a record of Jesus saying, if you even look at a woman to lust after her, you've already committed adultery with her in her heart, which is out. I mean, with all due respect to Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount and people out there that still hold that in high regard. No, it's not the same. It's not the same. You can be biologically wired to have sexual attraction to a female if you're heterosexual, right? So you can have sexual thoughts. You can even have a sexual fantasy, but that is nowhere near the same as breaking your marriage vows and going through all the hoops and shoots and whatever else you have to go through to actually follow through with committing adultery. I mean, to me, it's ludicrous and insane. So I just had to throw that in, because when I saw this from Tertullian, I thought, well, of course it has to be about the way the women dress. And of course, she's the devil's gateway. I mean, it's just insanity. And the fact that we still try to follow these codes and these ideas from an ancient world that was incredibly misogynistic because of the agricultural era that we were in. Yep. It leaves me at a loss for words, Derrick, really. It just leaves me at a loss for words.
You're not the only one. This is the thing that I want to kind of drill into this. I want to double click on this, is that if you look at, and this is my golden moment here. This is my golden moment. We're going to the mountaintop, and we're going to see the promised land. and it's this, that and here's the thing. I got to couch this by saying that, if you're offended by things that I might say about Christianity, this is your moment to leave the room. Because, if you don't want to hear it, I don't want to hurt your feelings. But once you hear this, you're not going to be able to unhear it. So that being said, how do humans reproduce? They get naked and bump uglies. They have sex. They do it.
Really?
They have
I thought it was
carnal relations. Because sex is what makes babies. Now, we have a lot of really cool technology now. Like we've had test tube babies, and I suspect that we've already had a human clone or two. I suspect. I mean, just based on the science.
Sure.
But by and large, most of us, the way we get babies, we have sex with someone and procreate. And when you look at an idea, how an idea propagates, whether it be women's suffrage, civil rights, abolition,
Yep.
the breakdown of child labor, that it took men and women working together to create an idea that reproduced.
Mm-hmm.
Human ideas, human beliefs do not propagate asexually. Mm. Just like we don't propagate asexually.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to say something really controversial here. And I'm no stranger to controversy. I don't really care, but that's why Christianity is dead. It's dead, and it's like the proverbial chicken with its head cut off. The chicken keeps running around. It doesn't quite realize that it's dead yet. Why? Because the feminine energy of Christianity has been forsaken.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm going to say something else here, right? Because when we talk about sexuality, and this is not all gay men, but some gay men have feminine energy,
mm-hmm.
right? Or let me say an abundance of it, because if we're going to all be intellectually honest, all men, we all have some feminine energy, right? If we're going to be intellectually honest, but there are some gay men, bisexual men, that have more of it than others. Mm-hmm. And this is not to say anything bad about my gay friends or bisexual friends, because I'm an ally. I support you. I celebrate you. But the reality is that homosexuality, left to its own devices, can't reproduce. It
right.
Can't reproduce, yeah. Right. So the church has to come to a conclusion. Either there's no feminine energy, or there's feminine energy that's been suppressed. And even if it's been suppressed, if you lock a woman away and you're a virile man, she's a virile woman, and you lock her away, or you put a wall of separation between you two, you can't reproduce either, because the energy has been separated, right? So so either this energy has been suppressed, like there's a wall erected between it, which prohibits its reproduction, or that there is no feminine energy in it, which causes it not to reproduce, or and again, this is not a swipe against my friends in the gay community. This is not that. I want to make this perfectly clear that maybe there's some homosexual energy in Christianity.
Oh, there's no question.
No, I'm not. I'm not talking about like how we see it manifested in like molestations and sexual abuse. I'm talking about
No, I
an
understand.
energy,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
an
No,
energy that cannot reproduce.
no,
And
totally.
that's, yeah. Go ahead.
No. I don't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No. I mean, but that's where I'm going with this. Is that, you know, if you look at Christianity and to a lesser degree other religions, because well, let me put it this way: the big three Middle Eastern religions, the ones that all worship El Shaddai, right? Ostensibly, right? Judaism, Islam, Christianity, that they all suffer from the same malady, basically, because there's no feminine energy in it. And there's lip service paid to it in the holy texts, right? In the scriptures, but at the end of the day, the manifestation is not given to empowering the divine feminine. And so because of this, any organism that cannot reproduce dies. It dies. Now, yes, there are organisms that reproduce asexually, and there are lizards, I think, that have been found that where they have conceived without both biological sexes, but that's rare. And it's something that's not passed on. It's not like an evolutionary trait where, like if you have a fish that produces asexually. I think there was once a shark, and this was a big deal a few years ago. They called it the Virgin Mary shark, right? Because this shark had been in captivity for years. There was no male in there, but the shark got pregnant and had a cub.
Interesting.
I think that's what they call baby sharks.
Interesting.
Right. I'm sorry. I promise you, I'm not drinking. It's dry January. I haven't had a drink, and maybe that's my problem.
Yeah,
but
I have a problem. I don't drink enough.
exactly. I haven't had enough alcohol yet. That's my problem. but yeah. So that mother shark, the female shark, had a baby shark. But that baby shark is not reproducing asexually, right? You follow what I'm saying? And this is why. Well, let me say this. I think that the early church fathers feared equality. They feared giving women the same power that men had, because I'm going to say something else controversial too, right? Because wars have not been fought over men's penises. Can I say that again for the people in the back? Wars have not been fought over men's penises, but what a woman has biologically, men have fought and died over. History is littered with women who ostensibly had incredible sexual allure, sexual prowess, that men led other men into battle over that woman.
Yeah.
And so the early church fathers, like most educated men, understood the power of female sexuality. They understood it. And so they fought to suppress it, because if women were considered to be the mental, the intellectual, the spiritual, the emotional equal of men, plus they have that sacred, you know what, that this is a problem, because now women can actually ascend to power and subordinate or subjugate men. That is my hypothesis. So what I'm saying is I'm not trying to body slam kneecap or kick Christianity in the nuts here. That's not my objective. Believe it or not, Christian friends, I'm throwing you a bone. A bone, not a, never mind. Never mind. A bone. I'm throwing you a bone. And it's this, that either you reclaim the divine or sacred feminine, or you seek to see your religious paradigm perish.
Mm.
And that, Aaron, is my climactic moment. I need a cigarette.
So just to get into this a little, get in the weeds with this, something I want to point out. So sex can be a verb, right? We all know about that.
Yep.
But it's also a noun, correctly. It is correctly a noun in the English language. And when we're talking about sex as a noun, we're not talking about the act. We're talking about which parts an animal has. So to apply this to humans, because this is what people say. This is what people say when you start talking about the gender issues. They want to conflate and confuse, I think, gender with sex, and sex even with sexuality. So here's what I mean. We have them. We call them gender reveal parties. That's not actually technically the correct term. It should be a sex reveal party, because we're revealing the sex of the baby. Because gender, at least from where I sit, and my perspective on this, is entirely a social construct.
Yes.
Entirely a social construct.
Which that's a whole nother show.
It is.
But continue
go a little deeper than you want me to.
But,
so people will say, when the transgender issue comes up, or gender issues come up in political discourse or political dialogue, for example, people will say, well, you're either I remember somebody saying, it's like a plug and a light in. You're either born the plug or the outlet. It's one of the two.
You're born. You're binary. You're either born a 1 or a 0.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, yeah, and so that's sex. When people are talking about gender, they're talking about the social constructs. In other words, how society defines how someone born with that genitalia is what they're supposed to be interested in, what's okay for them in terms of their personal expression. So when you and I were growing up, you're a little bit older than me, but I would consider us, even though I think technically we're from different generations, I consider us from the same generation, definitely from the same time period, right? Mm-hmm. And so, blue was a male. Guys didn't wear pink, until like maybe the late 70s, early 80s or something. Yeah. And then it faded out pretty quick. So guys didn't play with dolls, didn't paint your nails, because these were defined roles. And so the issue is whether or not a person, their sex has nothing to do with it. In other words, the parts that they have has nothing to do with it. It has to do with how well or comfortably they're able to fit into the socially defined role of what it means to be that sex. And that's where the gender issue needs to be discussed, not necessarily from a physical level, but more, or a biological level, but more from a sociological level. And the same thing with sexuality. So when we're saying homosexuals can't produce, that's just a fact of nature, right? Because as human beings, and this is something unique to human beings from everything that I've studied and looked at, there's one tribe of baboons that comes close. That comes the closest, and I can't remember what they're called. One species, not tribe. Species of baboons in all of nature that comes close, the people that have studied this. But we are uniquely obsessed with sex on the mental plane as an animal species. You're never going to see. So, for example, like I grew up, my grandparents owned a dairy farm. So they raised cattle and for their milk. And not once did I ever see the bull getting it on with one of the cows, and all the other cows gather around like middle schoolers at a fight,
Ooh.
to watch it and check it out. So sexuality is, for human beings, is as much, if not more, mental as it is actually physical and just for reproduction. And that's one of the problems that I think the church and various different religious sects have had with sexuality is, and that's why, the remarks that Jesus made that I said earlier, because they want you to become more like animals. It's so funny, because what we used to say was, well, we've got to be sanctified and godly, and we're not going to just be like animals, and just screw everything that comes along. But most animals, with a few exceptions, reproduce, have sex simply for reproduction. And the animals, like the bird species and stuff that they've studied, who are monogamous, barely have sex, because it is strictly for procreation. And that's really so when they're saying, I heard the craziest stuff in the church. I remember a Kojic preacher that I was listening to, and half his message was on, if you are not facing each other during the sex act, you're having sex like animals. Oral sex was completely off the table.
Yeah.
Right. So, but in reality, they were wanting human beings to act more like animals. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I don't know if we can talk about, I just thought it was important to distinguish between sexuality. So your sexual orientation has nothing to do with your sex, gender.
Right.
Or whether or not you can reproduce. They're two totally separate things. So in other words, a homosexual sexual orientation is no different in its basic nature and components than a heterosexual's sexual orientation. It's all about what turns you on, not about what reproduces. And that's what makes us different.
Yeah.
As human beings, because we get turned on by this stuff. Right.
Right.
So I just wanted to distinguish sexuality. Gender is a totally different thing. It's a social construct. But then if we're going to talk about the sacred feminine or the divine feminine or feminine energies, because we're not talking about biological reproduction, when we talk about something that's going to be fruitful and something that's going to reproduce. So we're talking about something that then moves into the mental plane at the very least.
Yep.
And I believe the spiritual plane as well, but not everybody, is on board with spirituality. That's fine. You have to at least recognize the mental aspects of it. So when we're talking about the sacred feminine and we're talking about organizations like the church not being able to reproduce, then we have to define what is male energy, masculine energy, for lack of a better way to express it, or the sacred masculine, in contrast to the sacred feminine. In other words, what does that look like? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that's perfect sense. Yep.
Okay. One of those times my internal dialogue is like, I don't know, my mouth is going, but I don't know if it makes sense.
Well, you set that one up really good, because you said, hey, when I was a preacher, I'd get on stage and start moving the mouth, and I have to go back and listen. And I completely get that, because sometimes I get on a train of thought. I get on an intellectual tear, and then I have to go back and kind of reevaluate, what did I really say here? Because you'll say something that's really, let me say this: your mouth will do something that gratifies your brain and gives you a dopamine hit. And then all of a sudden, you're just like, really, you're letting the dopamine. It's not a dopamine drip. It's like a dopamine IV hit, right? And you're just going and going and going. But I want to throw my Christian friends another bone too, right? Because this is one where, as a Christian pastor, a Christian preacher, that I wrestled with for a long time before I left Christianity. And I said, what if the Holy Spirit is the feminine energy? but it's, it's dressed up like a dude. In other words, it's hidden so that it's not attractive in the way that feminine energy would normally be attractive to a man. And I say this like when I had my church in Arizona, we had a program where we took black hoodies to homeless women and gave it to them because the black hoodies didn't reveal their sex. They didn't reveal that they were women, and so they were less likely to be sexually assaulted in the streets. So what if the Holy Spirit is the feminine energy? And so with that, I want to dredge up a Gnostic concept and talk about Sophia. Right? Because I mentioned Sophia when you were in your live stream, right? You were talking about feminine energy. And Sophia, if you think of the etymology of the name Sophia, you'll find that in sophistry, sophistication, things like that, right? In other words, Sophia, the etymological root of Sophia means wisdom, right? And I think about this because I pick on Maya a lot, my wife. I pick on her a lot, and I always tell her, I say, baby, you're a Proverbs 31 woman. She is, she's wise, tremendously wise, tremendously beautiful. She knows how to handle business, how to take care of things, and so that feminine energy. So, and I think back on my mom. My mom raised 3 kids. She, worked 2 and 3 jobs most of the time. She was always hustling. She always, she was always working. Always had something going on. Some enterprise, because she just felt she had to do that to take care of her kids. My mom was wise. She had this feminine wisdom about her, and I recognize that, and I see that in a lot of other people that I know, a lot of other women that I've been exposed to in my life, that they had that wisdom. So Sophia, as the story goes, Sophia was wise, but she was also creative. And she wanted to create something, and correct me if I have the story wrong, something to love her back. She wanted to love something and be loved in return. And so she gave birth to what became the demiurge, which the Gnostics believe was the Old Testament God. I'm not going deep down that rabbit hole, but this whole thing about Sophia and wisdom, to me, it's like, okay, when people will say, okay, common sense says do this, do this, do this. But there's also something called mother wit. And that mother wit, I think, is that feminine energy. I think that common sense is what we men like to refer to as it's the statement of the obvious. It's as plain as the nose on your face. This just makes sense, right? But mother wit has not just IQ, but it has EQ. It has an emotional quotient as well, and it's as high as any intellectual quotient, and that is information, data that is as valuable as the intellectual, right? And so when we ignore or deny the sacred feminine, we ignore or deny wisdom. And watch this. I used to preach this too. I said that you begin with data, and data, when aggregated and collated, produces information, and information, when aggregated and collated, becomes knowledge, and knowledge collated and aggregated becomes wisdom. And I used to believe that, except it's not exactly true, because there are a lot of people that have knowledge but no wisdom.
True.
And you can aggregate, collate, slice, dice, julienne, and blend all the knowledge you want, and it may never produce wisdom.
Yeah.
You know, there's an old adage is that that knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in fruit salad.
I love that.
You know, and so what I want to talk about here is, you know, I want to talk a little bit about Sophia as a person, as a being, but I also want to talk about wisdom. How is it like, if you go back and look in your Bible and the account of King Solomon and the two women, that one had lost her baby, one had a baby, but the other one stole the baby of the living baby and claimed it as hers. And so Solomon says, okay, perfect. We have the perfect solution. We'll cut the baby in half and give each of you half. And then the actual mother of the child, she said, no, I'd rather my child be with someone else than to be, you know, drawn in half. And that's wisdom. That's wisdom. That's an emotional. In other words, Solomon's proffered solution was definitely intelligent. But the woman, see, and people always talk about the wisdom of Solomon, but Solomon really, all Solomon was a proxy for a bigger concept. Solomon, what he did is he created the atmosphere for wisdom to be displayed. He did not display the wisdom himself in that case. The wisdom was the actual mother of the child, who said, no, the child's better off alive. Yeah. And so I want to kind of dig into that there.
Yeah. I want to come back to that's great, man. Let me just comment on that. That left me a little mind blown. I've never heard that story explained that way before. But that's a great revelation, Pastor. You said something earlier about I don't. You mentioned homosexuality in terms of something being able to reproduce, and then you said that that's a problem within the church, right? Yep. And then you talked about the Holy Spirit as the feminine aspect of God. But the truth is, like, dude, I mean, they did away with the divine feminine, and people say, well, what about Mary? You know, what about the veneration of Mary and stuff? That comes later. That comes as Christianity is attempting to assimilate cultures.
Yep.
And to make the job easier of assimilating cultures, they allowed Mary to kind of take the place of the goddess worship. Because here's the thing, this is why Christianity in its current context is such an aberration and so abnormal to human history. And by the way, I think it's important to mention, I was reading this today and I thought, wow, this is really a good point, that we have had millions of years of history as a species, and the ability to write and read is really a new it's really a recent thing, right?
Yep.
So we have a tendency again to condemn ancient people as stupid or whatever because they didn't know what we have the opportunity to know today about the physical world, about biology, about astrophysics, stuff like that. Yep. But they weren't necessarily stupid. So in order to assimilate these cultures, right, I think it was very cunning. I wouldn't say wise. I would say cunning to allow Mary to kind of hold this feminine archetype, if you will. But my point is, it's something that the human soul needs and craves and desires. And it's interesting to me that the Catholic Church was able to recognize this and say, okay, we'll venerate Mary, we'll pray to Mary, we'll call her the mother of God, things like this. Yeah. And then the Protestant groups like that we're part of cut her out completely. but Mary's still not part of the Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And that's unique to Abrahamic religions, and especially unique to monotheism, right?
Yep.
And so I do think that there is priests have to take a vow of chastity, or I'm not sure, celibacy. Thank you. Yes, that's it. So there really is. Think about how much that just cuts off the feminine energy, even that priests can't marry.
Yeah. They can't partake of the divine feminine or the sacred feminine.
Not at all. It's as though it doesn't exist. It's crazy to me. And you compare this to other spiritual systems. In the East, you have tantric yoga, which recognizes, Shiva and Shakti, the sacred feminine, sacred masculine, and then the way that's embodied or practiced sacramentally. But other spiritual paths as well, sexuality has a tendency to be integrated as a sacred part of that, which then automatically includes the feminine, the sacred feminine, the divine feminine with it. So it's just really interesting to me how we evolved in this Western culture with this predominant religious system. And by that, I mean the Abrahamic religions. And there is no sacred feminine, and then watch the oppression of women. Because if we think the oppression of women is bad in conservative fundamentalist Christianity, the oppression of women also exists in conservative Orthodox fundamentalist Judaism, and it definitely exists in conservative fundamentalist Islam, right? Yep. And so by cutting off the sacred feminine, in other words, it's the old alchemical axiom, as above, so below, right?
Yep.
As we eradicate or exile, if you will, the divine feminine, you see that then playing out on the earthly and the physical plane as well in our social relationships and stuff like that. And so the whole topic to me is just fascinating. And then, of course, my background being in counseling and psychology and things like that, I wonder, what does this do to the psyche of a people? What does this do to the individual psyche of a person and the collective psyche of a group? And I think that's the real damage then that gets done. And here we are, two dudes, talking about this.
Yeah.
And one of the things that because I came at like religious trauma and everything from my own perspective, but also from the masculine or the male perspective, my perspective of religious trauma as a male, I remember putting out a survey to the religious trauma recovery group, like, what has caused you the most trauma in your life in regards to Christianity? And I was certain, beyond a shadow of a doubt, it was going to be hell. The doctrine and the teaching of eternal conscious torment and being scared into the church. I wasn't even close. Not even close. It turned out that sexual, and I'm not just talking about, I don't want to get shadow banned by YouTube, so I'm trying to think about the best way to say this. I'm not just talking about SA from the standpoint of the physical aspects of it that happen in churches, which is horrible, but the mental and emotional abuse of, it's just shocking to me how many women posted or came back in that survey or then posted later that, growing up in the church, as soon as they hit puberty, so we're talking anywhere from maybe a 9 or 10-year-old at the bottom, youngest end, to maybe 13, 14, maybe at the older end of that. You got to make sure you have the right. I don't remember who shared this. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to say anyway, but I can't get this image out of my mind. She had a memory of standing in front of a mirror and had to hold her arms up like this to see if her midriff was showing. And she had a shirt on that was showing her midriff, and her mom made her go change because it might cause the elders to stumble. And I can't get that image out of my, like what that does to a young girl psychologically, to attack her body in such a way that it is the devil's gateway. It is the instrument of sin.
Yeah.
It is, it's just mind boggling to me. I have a hard time getting my mind around it, Derrick.
You know what? You bring up a really good point, and you have to ask, okay, what is the problem? Is the object of temptation the problem, or is it the attitude of the observer of the object of temptation? And the problem is with the observer, because that's like you see a Rolex watch, and you say, you know, I'd like to have that Rolex watch, but I can't afford a Rolex watch, so I'll steal the Rolex watch. So the Rolex watch is not a problem. It is a prop in the play, right? But the actor is the one who has the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we've lost it with femininity, is that we blame a woman's physique, or we blame a woman's face, or we blame a woman's hair, or we blame a woman's smell, and we say, oh, I'm tempted. And it was temptation that caused me to do X, Y, and Z. And it's not the woman. Listen, for all the ladies out there, especially those of you who have gone through some kind of trauma like this, it was not your fault. Okay, period, full stop. It's somebody. If people say you need to control how your daughters dress, and I would say to them, no, you need to control what your boys are thinking. You need to teach them how to get hold of the arrest there. Because let me say this, right, is that, again, we're always taught, your body is a temple kind of thing, right? If our bodies collectively, humans, are a temple, then women's bodies are a temple of high worship.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not getting any, y'all please bear with me here, because the thing is that the woman's body is capable of receiving a man, pleasing a man, and carrying the seed of a man. It's the only mechanism in the anthropological understanding of humans that can do that. And because of that, when some, God damn. Okay. I'm thinking about a time when I was an associate pastor in a church, and we moved into a new building. Mm-hmm. And it was said to everybody in leadership that if you see someone bringing food or beverage or even chewing gum into the sanctuary, that you were to stop them. Why? Because they were violating a consecrated place. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When I was growing up, and us little boys, when we were feeling our little mannish oats, and we want to walk up and down the street saying cuss words, just because it was our way of asserting ourselves, right? And we would cuss and cuss and cuss until we got to the front of a church, and we stop. And we stop and we walk on by, and then we start cussing again. Why? Because we were taught that was a sacred place. You didn't even walk past it thinking dirty thoughts or saying dirty things. Mm-hmm. Yet we will objectify women, and so this is where I want to bifurcate this for in the process of doing this. I want to unpack this a little bit, because there is the divine feminine and the sacred feminine. I'm going to tell you why I think they're two different things, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron, because you're a lot smarter than I am. So, but but the thing that I'm saying is that we wouldn't even say bad words around the church. And I remember being in church as a kid, and I see some girl, and I think she's cute, and I'm like, oh God, oh God, oh God, I gotta control my thoughts. I gotta control my thoughts. So I'm gonna go to hell. I'm going to hell. I'm going to hell. Right? And but hear me what I'm saying. The building is nothing. Buildings ain't shit. They're not. Buildings are edifices made by men. But if you believe in God, then a woman or likewise a man are edifices that are made by the hand of God.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when we objectify women, we defile a temple.
Mm.
Much less when we put our hands on our women in anger, or we do things that we can't say because we don't want to upset the algorithm to women.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where sacred feminine comes in, because in my humble opinion, all 100% all of femininity is sacred.
Mm-hmm.
All femininity is sacred, and all of it deserves to be honored, respected, cherished, all of that, right? Now, divine has to do with things like Sophia or Lilith, right? That the divine has something to do with something that's ethereal, that's spiritual, that's not of this world, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But all femininity is sacred. And I think that whenever you denigrate women, when you deny women opportunity, when you do something that you think that because you're into this hyper toxic masculinity thing, and you abase or debase women, you are violating sacred femininity, because all femininity is sacred. And I'm going to tell you something. I know I'm going to take some hits from this. I don't care. I don't care. It's like the femininity is sacred. It is sacrosanct. It deserves to be protected. It deserves to be honored. It deserves to be cherished. It deserves to be, protected. Whatever. It just is. And so I want to stop there and kind of kick it over to you and kind of get your thoughts about this, because like I said, this is where I divide those two and how I divide them. So I want to make sure that my point, that my assertion is clear.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I'll stop.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. That makes perfect sense to bifurcate those things, to separate those two out. I like that. And I like the idea that, all femininity is sacred, and separating that out from the divine. Because I do think the divine aspect of it is important. I really do. I think it's important to us as human beings. And I think one of the things that's so interesting to me with this too is the core doctrine of what makes you a Christian from the Council of Nicaea onward is a belief that Jesus was the only begotten Son of God, or God manifested in the flesh, or what we would call theologically, excuse me, the incarnation. So I heard this over and over and over again, and progressive Christians, I'm looking at you right now, because you guys love to tell us that if you want to know what God's like, you got to look at Jesus. Jesus is God with skin. Jesus is God manifested in the flesh. But that's only half of human. That's only one side of the polarity.
Right.
Like if we say this is God, when the church elevated Jesus to the position of exclusive divinity, right? He's
Yep.
exclusively divine. He's divine in a way that you and I, Derrick, are not divine. He is the fullness of the Godhead. Paul said, in him, watch this, in him, although I don't have an axe to grind with Paul like other people. And I think when he's talking about this, I don't think he's talking about Jesus necessarily, but this is the way we read it because he says in Christ. He's talking about Christ. I think he's talking about the divine principle of the Logos, but that's really getting in the weeds with it. But for most people, when Paul says in him, the fullness of the Godhead dwells, he's a man.
Right.
So how can you have it in Genesis 1, 26 and 27 that God created humanity in his own image, male and female, he created them, implying that there is a feminine and masculine equality,
right,
and balance in the image of God, and then only have Jesus being the image of God. You see what I'm saying? Or a man, essentially. And so you have a Trinity. You have a Father. I mean, you want to talk about the original good old boys club.
Yeah.
You got the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I'll tell you something else. I remember I'm just trying to think which parts I want to share, which parts I want to leave out. Give me a second. I don't want to put my mouth on autopilot. It seems to be my theme for the night. I was doing a teaching on angels. And the idea that angels could take a feminine form was anathema. I remember I was at this church in the Bible Belt and talking about angels, and this issue comes up, and most people don't know. It's somewhere in some obscure verse in Zephaniah or Zechariah, one of those Z books, where there's a female angel that's doing the talking. But the idea that there could even be female angels. So just think about, and I think about this a lot too, because the conscious mind or the left brain thinks in language. So and language is entirely symbolic. Entirely symbolic. The words that I'm using are not the same as the things that I'm using the words to represent. The map is not the territory, right?
Right.
The right brain tends to think more in images, or you could divide it this way and say the conscious mind is more verbal. It's the verbal self. The subconscious mind is the self of image and feeling. And that's an important distinction, but the subconscious mind is what controls us. It's what determines so many determining factors. I mean, almost all stage magic is built on the ability to manipulate people at a subconscious or a subliminal level. That's the whole thing. So if all our imagery of the divine realm is male and masculine, which it is, unless you're Catholic and you got Mary.
Right.
But even for the Catholics, you got one. And she's just sorry, I don't mean to offend any of our Catholic friends. She's just a human being compared to Jesus.
Right.
Or compared to God. Other than that, all your angels, all your archangels are male.
Yep.
Most of your saints, the vast majority of those sainted in the Catholic Church are male.
Yep.
So you have a divine realm that you teach people and talk to people about, entirely populated with too much testosterone. And then we wonder why there's religious wars. We wonder why there's church splits. We wonder why there's 30,000. You know what? I mean, this is a total reframe. How many times we said, there's 30,000 different denominations. And the point usually is, if God wanted to get a message across, he sure didn't do a very good job. Yep. Because even his own followers can't agree, because there's 30,000 whatever denominations. But
yep.
Maybe that's just because it's loaded and top heavy with too much testosterone. You ever been part of an organization, doesn't matter what kind, where there's too much testosterone in a room?
Yeah.
It's not productive.
Oh, dude, I raised 5 sons, so it's like I know what that looks like in real time.
I had 3 older sisters and no brothers, so
Yeah. So yeah, and you think about that, like, where they have people that they say they have roid rage, right? And the roid rage is not really the steroids that's causing it, it's the elevated testosterone that causes the rage,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So um, but again, I really believe, and this is kind of where I'm going with this, um, that I think that society, and this is in a very broad construct, because when I say society, I'm talking about not just American society, but not Western society, but society in general. I think that society suffers from the repression of the sacred feminine, and also the lack of acknowledgement of the divine feminine. Because I think that in order for us to acknowledge the sacred, or to liberate the sacred feminine, that we have to first acknowledge the divine feminine. And we have to understand that if there is a God, if there is a God, that this God expresses both male and female energy. It has to, because if it's just some dude up in heaven looking down, uh, golly, okay, I'm going to say something really kind of, I mean, this is a guy with the biggest case of blue balls in the history of time. It is just some dude, okay, and and I used to say this. I used to say this all the time. I said, if 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 we're supposed to be if the body of Christ is supposed to be the bride of Christ, I said, then we're all due for a good shagging when we get to heaven. If Jesus was celibate while he was walking the earth, he's not going to hold. He's not holding back.
Don't you think that's a problem too, though? So, I mean, you've got Jesus born of a virgin, right?
Well, yeah.
And maintained this celibate lifestyle, at least. And this is where Gnosticism was incredibly empowering to women, and really a egalitarian movement in and of its own.
Yep.
Egalitarian, did I get that right?
Yep, that's exactly right.
Because complementary, the other one, and so Gnosticism really was way, way, way ahead of its time.
It was.
But this is another problem with it. We believe historically that Jesus was born of a virgin, and then historically that he didn't have any kind of sexual relations with a woman. Right. Whereas Gnosticism says, depending on the Gnostic version or Gnostic text, that probably he and Mary Magdalene, and maybe he and some other women were.
Yeah.
I mean, like it's almost like not in some Gnostic circles and Gnostic writings, it's almost like you'd think of the Summer of Love in the 60s or something.
Yeah. Jesus was like, all you need is love.
Yeah.
Come and get this loving.
So the imagery itself, I'm getting insight. I'm growing in real time here, because this is personally applicable to me in the way my persona formed and shaped under this stuff. But the imagery, the storytelling, the entire gospel, born of a virgin, sinless, and by sinless we're sneaking in there, oh yeah, and he also didn't have sex at all, ever, didn't love a woman.
Right.
The entire thing is sterile, and so it sterilizes humanity. And I think that was I think that's part of the purpose. I mean, if there is a demiurge, and the demiurge wants to keep us from discovering our divine potential, and the demiurge wants to keep us in this prison of humanity and recycling and whatever,
Yeah.
then it would be very important to sterilize the spiritual potential or the divine potencies
Oh,
of the group you're trying to enslave.
So it's not sterilizing the body. He wants the body to reproduce.
Yeah, of course.
But if you sterilize the spirit, then we don't reproduce spiritually.
Spirit, yeah.
And so the whole concept of escaping this physical prison becomes impossible because we're so, oh boy.
Yeah, we can't tap into the divine human potential without the sacred feminine, and I would argue the divine feminine. Otherwise, we're sterile. Sterile's the word.
Wow. And see that closes the loop on what I was starting off with, because I was saying the whole thing is sterile because without the feminine energy, if everything is masculine, there's no reproduction, right? And so you close that loop completely, and that it's the spiritual sterilization. Oh man.
But think about life, though. I mean, when I think about something that is vibrant and living, it has a, I don't know if this is the right term to use. It has a wild side to it, if I could say that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And our society is so damn sterile in the arts and the only area that really maybe isn't is shit, I don't know, technology and communication. I mean, you know what I mean? Like that's like multiplying out of control.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It just feels like
you're onto something. It's like, if you think about science and technology, and even those things, even science and technology, I believe has a masculine and feminine energy, right? And if you go back and look, I was looking at some of the women in history. Like there was a woman in England. She had built what was the biggest telescope in the world for like it remained there for like 100 years, but she couldn't claim to have done it. It was credited to her brother, but now it's known that she's the one that actually did it, because again, women were repressed. But so science and technology, they move forward. But if you think about it, like what you were saying is absolutely right. Arts and humanities, I was May and I were talking about this one day. We're in the supermarket and they're playing all these old 60s songs. And so we know these songs and we're talking about them. And I was like, yeah, that's when people actually wrote songs and played instruments, right? Now it's like you got a beatbox and you got auto tune and you got all of these different things. And so the music is sterile. And now you have AI that can reproduce art and things like that. You're right. The arts and the humanities are growing cold. They're waxing cold. Where technology marches forward, because I think that science never, well, let me put it this way. I won't say that it never has, but I think science has been more accepting of the feminine energy within, and has manifested that more than any other discipline, science and technology. But the arts and humanities, brother, you just preached right there. Y'all cash app Aaron real quick.
Yeah. But I'm even thinking about things like ecstasy and just general enjoyment of life. Like I'm thinking about children, right? Like they giggle. You know what I mean? Like when was the last time you had a group of adults together in a setting and everybody was just giggling and kind of sort of lost in that like childlike ecstasy? I'm having a hard time putting language to what I'm thinking about, but we've lost so much of that. And I think that somehow, and I'm just saying this intuitively, that's directly connected to this rejection, exile of the sacred feminine and the divine feminine from our lives.
I completely agree.
Yeah. And it's like we're ashamed of it, like even talking about sexuality and stuff like that. There's still as advanced or progressive or as liberated as we think our culture is, it's still talked about in hushed tones.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I don't know. I think it's a problem.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this too. Like, when you look at DNA, the double helix, right? That DNA requires a helix of intertwined strands, right? That's what makes DNA special. And it's funny that DNA exists in all living things. It exists in the plants. It exists in animals. Exists in the fungal bodies. It exists everywhere there's life. And the thing is that double helix represents the masculine and feminine energy at a molecular level.
That's a good point.
And that it when and if you think about this, right, you look at what they call genetic defects. Genetic defects happen is when one of the strands is broken, when either the masculine or the feminine energy is broken. And I don't know, that might be oversimplifying things. And if somebody says that, okay, cool. But I think that the evolution of humanity, if we're going to grow, if we're going to evolve, if we're going to adapt to a changing world, that we have to have a balance of both of these energies. We have to have both the feminine and the masculine contributions.
I completely agree. I'm sure, again, for those that don't know, I've been driving this thing. What that means is I'm like starting the podcast and doing it from Restream. And Derrick has always done this for 5 years. Derrick did this. And for some reason, I can't see any comments from Facebook at all.
You know what? I was looking at that too. Matter of fact, yeah, I don't see any from Facebook.
I know there's if I go, let me go on here. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off again. Yeah, sorry about that.
No, if you go to Facebook, you'll see them. There's a ton of them.
Yeah. So I don't know what I'm doing wrong. When I put the key in the ignition, something goes wrong. I'm laughing because I even have a reputation at my job. Don't let they even got me like these certain crystals that are supposed to like certain substances. They're not really crystals. I got one that's in the shape of a pyramid. But one of my coworkers brought one in and put it between me and the computer. She was the one that always had to help me with my technology and my computer. And she brought one of these and said, "Here, this is supposed to help with, I don't know, absorbing the energy or something." Because I have such a hard time. And stuff will happen. People look at me and say, "Only this could only happen to you, Aaron."
But let me just say, for the record, to defend you here, Aaron, that it cannot just happen to you, because it happens to me too.
Yeah, but there goes my excuses. I can get people to do stuff for me. See,
it's like looking at our Facebook. It says there are 32 comments.
Holy shit!
Yeah, but I can only see I can only see 5 of them. Lynn Leach says, "We have to do the work to make this marriage happen." And C. Rodriguez says, "Magical." Lynn Leach says, "Science and alchemy / spirituality used to be the same thing." And Kyle Taylor says, "You can't have a father without a mother. One defines the other." Great podcast. But that's just 5 of 32.
Yeah, let me see. I can see a few. It's saying on mine, like I can only see a few as well. So who the hell knows? I mean, I can see what you put in there. see if I see anything else. Shannon Morris says, I was allowed, maybe I should. I was allowed very close to a preacher, not sexually at all, but he asked me to talk to my niece about her dress. He had no daughters. She's a beautiful girl. I refused. And he, oh my God. Oh, I'm sorry. Give me a minute. He embarrassed her publicly.
Oh, God.
I called it on him. He left the ministry. Well, good. I'm glad he got out of the ministry.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, I see that. I think yeah, pretty much I can only see, other than that, the ones that you can see. So who knows?
Yeah, because I looked in here at one point. Maya had chimed in. She said, I tuned in right at exactly the right time, or something to that effect. So I think that she probably chimed in as I was giving her a compliment about being a Proverbs 31 woman.
Yeah, she probably did. That was a good time for her to chime in.
It was. Yeah,
I did see Renegade. She said, I think trauma sterilized us spiritually. Yeah, for sure. I mean, and again, I just want to emphasize, like, we're two dudes talking about this stuff. I can't even imagine what the trauma that some of these women went through just growing up, just the subtle, because sometimes the most damaging trauma is the subtle trauma. If it's really bad, like neglect is child abuse, but it's much easier to address child abuse in the counseling room than it is to address neglect, because child abuse is so in your face. It's so out there. You know, I was sexually abused, or I was, there I go using that phrase again, or I was physically abused, or, but someone that's neglected, their needs are not being met. And so that creates its own developmental challenges in some cases. And there's nothing, right? There's nothing to, well, I didn't get beat, and I didn't get called names. Yeah, but you were left to play by yourself for 8 hours.
Yeah.
You know? So there's a subtlety to some of this stuff where it doesn't have to be this outright, oh my God, I have this horrible memory in my brain where this happened to me as a young girl or as a woman, but this sort of dripping faucet of messaging, like I was talking about earlier. There's no female in the Godhead. There's, meaning the Trinity. There's no female angels. And they got mad. I'm going to tell you right now, there was a group in that church, because I mentioned this earlier, you know, when I talked about it.
Yep.
I'll tell you that Bible Belt church, they weren't having it. No, God is male, you know.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Well, you know, there was I was having a conversation with, I don't know if you're friends with Irvin Reed or not, and I can say Irvin's name because you know, we talk about stuff and he's cool. But we were talking about, like, because Irvin's Native American, you know, and I'm black, and so we're talking about how you know, we were sharing a common experience where I was talking with somebody and they said, well, you know, it was talking about reparations, and they said, well, I shouldn't have to pay reparations or be part of that because my family didn't own slaves. You know, we didn't participate in that. I said, yeah, but you benefited from the system. You benefited from the system. And this is not to say that you know, you're held guilty because of that, but that you have to acknowledge that you got a head start because of that. Now, the same thing with the divine or sacred feminine is that there are a lot of people that say, well, I never catcalled a woman, or I never, you know, essayed or whatever. I never did anything, you know, but you benefited from a system that has permitted that, right? And that has given you a hall pass. Whether you used it or not is not relevant. You had it. This was in your hip pocket. It's always there waiting for you to pull out, right? So, you know, again, the fact that you are ignorant of it or you are non-participant in it, but if you benefited from it, then you bear a certain amount of.
Sorry, I don't mean to. I keep doing that to you tonight. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, man. Yeah.
I just that kind of stuff bothers me because we're still focusing on. We're not focusing on the victims, and I don't even know if victims is the right word, but like restorative justice, the difference is we focus on reparations to the person who was harmed in the event. We have retributive justice where we focus on the person. We'll spend millions of dollars to go to trial, put them in jail, etc., and so on, and leave the person that got robbed still destitute.
Yeah.
Because we're so focused on who, caused the harm here. And so to get defensive, this is what I'm trying to say, Derrick. I'm having a hard time getting my words out of here, but what I'm trying to say is to get defensive, like I'm a white male. So I had I check all the boxes. And, and I think we were joking around after the election. I said, all I got to do is go back to preaching and I'm good.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't know what y'all are going to do, but I'm not worried. The only thing I have to worry about is I got to scrub the internet of all the other shit I said. Right? I can just go back to preaching and I'm good. And so what I'm saying is that when people say, well, I don't have to pay because I didn't, or my ancestors didn't, or whatever, it takes the focus off the real issue. It takes the focus off of the harm that was caused to a person, or in this case, to an entire ethnicity and group of people. And that's where the focus becomes. So it's almost like the perpetrators not only perpetrate the crimes, they get the spotlight. I guess I don't really know how to say it.
No, you're absolutely right.
It's like the focus is staying here, and forget about. Well, I'm really sorry, that you struggled, but I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay, but that'd be like the Good Samaritan walking by the guy laying bleeding in the street and saying, "Well, I didn't do it, so good luck. I have no responsibility to you as the person bleeding in the street because I didn't cause it."
But Haiti was the second democracy in the Western Hemisphere after the United States, right? They won their freedom by revolution, like the Americans did. The difference is that the Haitians were black, and so the Haiti had to pay reparations to the slaveholders and to the French government, a bill that they didn't finish paying until 2005.
Well,
they got their independence in the early 1800s, Aaron. And they had to pay reparations to the slaveholders.
Dude, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there somebody going around implying that same kind of thing in this last election cycle in America?
Yeah, all the slave owners should be paid.
Yeah, because of the harm that came to them economically through.
Yep.
What a fucked up world. In a lot of ways, whatever Earth is, whatever we find out, when we die or beyond, it's a fucking insane asylum. It just is. Everybody's half crazy, at least. I mean, golly.
But again, think about this. I mean, let's think about this. I mean, and this is a good place to kind of land the plane. Think about this. What if the world were run by women? And let me say this, as a man, I don't have a problem with that, as long as it, like I think of people like Angela Merkel, or Benazir Bhutto when she was alive, and or Indira Gandhi. There have been some, and to a lesser degree, Margaret Thatcher. But but to a lesser degree. But imagine, I mean, I don't think that we'd be so quick to go to war. I think that we would understand the responsibility of sharing our resources. I think that we would have a better understanding of how to negotiate solutions instead of blasting our way through them. It's just I think that the early church fathers did irreparable harm to the Western world by concealing or denying the sacred and the divine feminine.
I was cracking up thinking, what would that look like? Because all you ladies out there, like you guys, the way you do conflict with each other is, I don't know, man. I'm a man, but I would think, let's go punch it out in the house.
you say that'd probably be better off.
That shit all y'all do to each other when you don't like each other and you're relating. And before any ladies get upset with me, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
It's like Chris Rock said,
a very different world for sure.
Chris Rock said one time, he said, if women ran the world, there would never be another war, but every 28 days we'd have serious negotiations.
Oh man, no, it is. There's an interesting dynamic that women have with each other that still, as a man, I'm trying to figure out. And I was raised in a household of women, man. So, yeah. You see anything else in terms of comments or anything you want to?
There's somebody on YouTube, and I can't make out this name. It looks like, I don't know.
I think it's an ohm symbol, but I might be wrong because I can't see it either. But I think it's an ohm symbol.
Yeah, but whoever that is, they kind of lit up the comments. It says, "I changed my YouTube name, sir. I don't know I don't know what that is either."
Yeah, and so just so people understand what we're looking at, sometimes emojis, if it's an emoji, sometimes we just see like garbled symbols or something.
Yeah. He says, "This has been
old. I'll speak for myself. I am old, and I'm fighting old age, and I refuse to get reading glasses." No shit. No. So my black dog was laying on the floor the other day, and I have a black coat, and it's been cold, right?
Yeah.
And so the lights weren't out, but they were dim, and my black dog is laying in the middle of the floor, and I went to pick it up because I thought it was my coat. I thought, God, I'm turning into Mr. Magoo. I do have a doctor's appointment or an eye doctor's appointment next month. It was as soon as they could get me in. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead. Go on with the comments.
No. This person said, "This has been a productive discussion. I appreciate your direct and factual approach, Derrick and Aaron." So thank you. But if you don't have anything else, I guess we can go ahead and bail out, man.
All right, man. As always, thanks everybody for listening, coming to our TED Talk, growing with us in real time. Derrick, thanks for your time, man. I just want to say again how much I appreciate you, how much I appreciate your time, how much I appreciate the fact that, what was it, 5 years ago?
Yep.
You invited me to come on your platform and be part of what you're doing. And you've been so generous with your time and your expertise and your friendship. And so I just want to publicly affirm you again as my friend and my brother, and let everybody know how much I appreciate you.
Likewise, man. This actually took me to a different level, spiritually, intellectually, and emotionally. And I am forever grateful for your friendship and your brotherhood. That's all I got to say.
All right, man.
And thank you all, as Aaron said, thank you for growing with us in real time. And that's it.
Peace and hair grease. We're out.
All right.